It's time for school days. Hope for moms and dads of school-aged kids.
I tell parents, you're like a training wheel on a bike. Your job isn't to make the bike move. Your job is to keep the bike upright.
Those of us who are the true educators, we really want to be given the opportunity to educate the whole child.
Sometimes we make decisions with our kids on how we think our kids are going to feel in the first 10 minutes versus thinking about 10 months or 10 years.
Oftentimes, as parents, I think we want to protect our kids, but I think one of the greatest gifts we can give them is allow them to experience adversity.
Yeah.
Here are your hosts, David and Janita Bailey.
Well, good evening and welcome to School Days Help for Moms and Dads of School-Age Kids. I'm Danita Bailey.
And I'm David Bailey.
Critical race theory, or CRT as it's called, has become a hot button issue and a concern for many parents of K through 12 students in the United States. 6 states, Idaho, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Texas, Iowa, and New Hampshire have passed laws, and nearly 20 additional states have introduced or plan to introduce similar legislation to regulate how race is discussed in the classroom. On today's show, we will ask our guests to define CRT, talk about its origin, and discuss what the nation's students are being taught in schools about race and our country's history with racism. So I had never even heard about CRT until about 3 months ago, and now you can't not hear about it.
Yeah, I was having a discussion with a friend of mine on Facebook about something, and he said, "Well, what do you think about CRT?" And I said, "I don't really have a comment on it because I don't know enough about it yet." And the irony of it is, so many of you know, I went to University of Pittsburgh and I was an undergrad double economics and business major. But some of you may not know that I had a minor in African American studies. And I was never taught CRT, even in my African American studies courses. And so, within the past few months, it's blown up the topic. And so there's a lot of different opinions, a lot of different posts out there. And it has become a very, very touchy situation. And being an educator myself, these things impact me directly. And many of my peers, but also the parents and families that are, that have kids in schools as well. So it was time to do this episode.
Yeah. And I mean, so much information is out there. There's 13.8 million results when you search for critical race theory. And, some of it is just plain wrong. I hate to say it, but some of it is just plain wrong. And, you and I, we really do our due diligence to understand a topic. And I really feel like I've studied for a critical race theory final this month, and just gotten as much information as we can to be knowledgeable to do this. But our show is really all about topics that impact your child's education, and we do not consider ourselves the experts. David has been teaching for 13 years now, and I founded and run an educational foundation, but we're just parents, and we really just want the best for our kids when it comes to their education. So in light of that, we've invited experts to educate and inform our audience and us. And we're really blessed to have an amazing lineup today. And just a quick note, we've done a few episodes about race that I want to refer to our audience. They can be found on our website, schooldazedshow.com, or on any podcast platform. So look for Racism, Justice, and Riots, also Injustice and Education Equality, and Valuing Differences. Those are some good ones to go back and check out. But before we go any further, let me just say it does take a village. If you hear a great parenting tip or nugget of advice, share it with your parent friends. Facebook it, Instagram it, tweet it, link it in, and add the hashtag School Days Show or hashtag I Am School Days. And remember, sharing is caring. Hit that share button and send this episode to some friends. And last, we also want you to be a part of the show. So if you're listening to us live on Facebook, and we have several people already here, glad to have y'all here. Feel free to put questions in the chat box, and we'll do our very best to get to them. So without further ado, let's introduce our guests. We have Dr. Bradley W. Davis. He is an associate professor and K through 12 professional leadership Ed.D. program lead in the Department of Education Leadership and Policy Studies at my alma mater, the University of Houston. Go Cougs. Welcome, Dr. Davis.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Also, Dr. Asia Martinez is an associate professor in the Department of English at the University of North Texas, where she conducts research on and teaches a range of courses concerning the rhetorics of race and ethnicity. She is the author of a book called Counterstory, The Rhetoric and Writing of Critical Race Theory. So welcome, Dr. Martinez.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
All right, we also have Dr. Jaretha Jordan. She's Executive Director of Curriculum and Instruction at Irving ISD. And my former boss, she hired me into Mansfield Independent School District, and I learned a lot from her and her leadership, and just great that she's doing great things now. So Dr. Jordan, we are so happy you are here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
All right, we also have Dr. Jean Baptiste, who owns Jean Baptiste Consulting, which is a practice that focuses on supporting the visualization and realization of building and sustaining diverse, inclusive, and equitable independent school communities. So Dr. Baptiste, we are so glad you're here today as well, and we're looking forward to your insight.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be zooming in with you all from Fort Lee, New Jersey.
Yes. And but not least, we have Dr. Vida Robertson, is the Associate Professor of English and serves as the Director of the Center for Critical Race Studies at the University of Houston downtown, where he teaches a wide range of critical race theory and African American literature courses at the University of Houston downtown. So welcome, Dr. Robertson.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
All right, well, let's get started. Can somebody tell us what is critical race theory in simple terms?
What is it?
Don't be shy.
Well, I guess I'll take a stab at it. Forgive the analogy. I'll take a go at it. For our listeners, forgive if it seems jargony kind of language, but critical race theory at its most basic level is a theoretical attempt. It's a framework of analysis that's based on the premise that race is not a natural category. It's not a biological feature of what it means to be a human being. And so if race is not a biological category, or then that is to say, if God didn't create it or Mother Nature construct it, then race must be a sociological tool that helps us organize our society for to achieve the objectives that we set out. And thus, this tool is implemented to prioritize and implement the social structures, the systems, and the procedures that we believe are most important in our society. And so that's critical race theory at its most basic attempt. It's a sociological tool that helps us understand that race is that people are raced. They don't have a race. So race is a verb. It's not a noun.
Okay, and what does that have to do? What does CRT have to do with systematic racism?
So I'll add that among several origins in the 80s, some Black academics, some legal scholars at Harvard developed this idea of critical race theory through which to look at systemic racism from a legal standpoint. And so it goes hand in glove with the study of and the understanding of the phenomenon of systemic racism.
Okay, and many people think that racism only exists from person to person. So, like, for example, if I go into a store and the store associate watches after me, thinking then I'm going to steal something, racism, person to person. You're talking about systemic racism. So what are some examples of what systemic racism is?
So one of the examples that I use when I'm teaching this to my students is I say, okay, what CRT provides is a way to look at things that we thought we were familiar with. So one of the things that applies to the students I teach, which are first year college students, is the admissions process. That's like a policy driven thing about how to get into college, how to apply, and everything that comes before that. So everything you did in K through 12, but definitely high school in particular. And you would think that that is, just not biased. You either did the work to get into certain schools or you didn't. But some of these systems, if you look at them, one in particular is the Michigan point system that was from University of Michigan. It shows on a 100-point scale different boxes within which to make points as an individual applicant. But some of those boxes have nothing to do with the individual and everything to do with where they live, what school they had access to, and how they were able to navigate that through usually their parents and their opportunities. And so one of the boxes that is the most offensive to my students, but a good example, is the one that is about school quality and school difficulty. And it's about how many AP or IB courses were offered at the school that they attended. And some schools offer 4 or less classes, and some schools offer 12 or more. And so it doesn't matter if you're a student who took all 4 of those classes or who took none of those 12 classes. Just by virtue of going to the school with 4 or less or the school with 12 or more, that determines what kind of points you'll get on your application. And so I use that as my example for students. I'm saying, who made that choice for you? Was that choice? Was that equal opportunity? Was that something that the individual had anything to do with? No, that's a systemic process that gets evaluated. And unfortunately, that evaluation still goes along the lines of things like race and class.
So if I might add to Dr. Martinez's brilliant answer, so what now help? So now we are left, we're at a moment where we recognize that at the formation of our nation, as the consideration of our body politic and body social, we are here and we have individuals that have been labeled as Latino, and others are African American, others are Caucasian, and others are Asian. Not necessarily because they have different colors. All of these people could be the exact same hue. But because, as my brother just previously mentioned, because we have a legal system who designated that those peoples are different, and therefore their difference will allow them different access to power, different access to resources, different access to opportunities. Those opportunities to live in school districts that allow you to have AP classes, right, was designated by race. Banks wouldn't give loans to certain designated people because they were a particular racial designation. Some peoples were never even allowed to leave their native lands because as a nation, we designated that they were Native American, and therefore there was a place outside of our ubiquitous American society where they needed to live, and therefore they had no access to said schools. So now critical race theory allows us to embrace the idea that very well-meaning people, right, in a nation who believes itself to be egalitarian or equally minded, is now functionally, right, allowing certain individuals to be successful and disadvantaging other individuals simply because they live in a body that has been legally designated as Black, legally designated as Latino, legally designated as Native or Caucasian. Now race ends up being a mechanism for determining success.
But I go back to, again, the original understanding and use of it was for legal scholars to understand how race and racism impacts legal systems. And that gets into whether it's healthcare or housing or the criminal justice system. That was the origin of critical race theory. It is not something that is taught in K-12 education. Yes, racism, yes, race are part of history courses and civics and that kind of thing. But critical race theory as a discipline, quite frankly, was something that I was not introduced to till I went to get my doctorate at the University of Pennsylvania in 2009. And my doctorate's not in critical race theory. It's in education, organizational leadership, and development. And so it is in academic circles that critical race theory has grown and has thrived, but not in K-12 education.
So tell us, why did critical race theory come about? Who developed this theory and why did they develop this theory?
So this is a really, I think, special question in relation to teachers and students, because the person given the most credit for originating it is Professor Derek Bell from Harvard Law School. And in the 70s, post-civil rights, and he was very involved, he worked under Thurgood Marshall for the NAACP. So he had this long activist history in his legal stance, but then became this law professor, one of the only two African American men at the time when he was hired. He was realizing that there was no centralization of looking at race and the lens of race when it comes to law and policy for his students. And so he was thinking, in relation to my students, how do I do this? So he wrote a textbook. and that's a textbook still in play. The other thing he did, though, is he developed something called counterstory. And that's the thing that I've studied, because that's the methodology, the claimed methodology of counterstory. Methodology sounds like a big, academic-y work. What it means is the way about which we do this work. And the way about which Derek Bell and others have chosen to do the work is through storytelling, through narrative, through weaving story and teaching and learning by story. And what he realized with these high-ranking elite Harvard students is that they did not have access points to things like the Constitution, for instance, which is so much in play right now. So what did he do? He developed characters and a story and dialogue and setting to discuss something like that as a central text to help them see these racial tenets that he wanted them to see, but through the kind of discussion that characters could have about it. He crafted a character, an alter ego, if you will, named Geneva Crenshaw, a Black woman, who he sent back in time to address the Constitutional Congress and talk to them about what their decisions were and what those decisions did for Black folks in the future in the time she was existing. So stuff like that is, I think, some of the brilliance and beauty that I think parents, if they understood that aspect of critical race theory, would get very excited about, because it provides access points to very, even for us as parents, hard to access documents like the Constitution.
So, Joe, basically what you're saying is he took high academic content, high conversation that is, maybe comfortable at the higher education level, and brought it down to the shelf of anyone who can pick it up and read it, so they can get a better and broader context in ways in a language that is accessible to people.
Through narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah, Derek Bell's two, I think, most well-known public, facing books are "And We Are Not Saved" and "Faces at the Bottom of the Well." Those are New York Times bestsellers because of their accessibility. Anyone can pick them up, read them, and gain something. His most famous piece, "The Space Traders," is in one of those books. But when he comments on why he did it for students, for learners, people to learn about these concepts in a way that helped distance themselves from being upset or taking it personally, and try to suspend that judgment to just learn what the story, very much like parables, right? Fables are trying to do for us in that tradition.
Okay, so one of the talking points I've seen a lot of lately is that CRT is, and I'm a math person, so for me that turns into an equal sign. CRT is equal to Marxism. Can someone talk about why is there discussions about that being a correlation to Marxism, and is it or is it not?
I have a few thoughts on that. So Marxism, that would require a whole nother show to break down, but I would say a simple version of that would be that it's a critique of the ills of capitalism. And for Marxist, neo-Marxist folks that hold that ideology dear, the primary organizing frame for society is the economy and is class. And that's different. Whereas, and I'm not going to say that critical race theory is a unified theory where all tenets are agreed upon. It's not. It's a contested living theory. But for most folks that adhere to CRT, they would say sort of the primary social determinant is race, not class. So there's a fundamental difference at the very core of these theories. So this contention that CRT is somehow built upon Marxism is, I'd say, a red herring. would probably be fair. But that's not to say that, folks can't borrow certain viewpoints from more than one theory to arrive at a particular understanding of society or elements of society. But I'll stop there. That's just, I would say fundamentally, what they see as the primary organizing frame of society is just different.
I think I would completely agree with my brother. He eloquently and powerfully helped us understand that fundamentally Marxism is interested in a classist analysis of our body politic and the economic structure that maintains it. I think often criticisms of critical race theory as Marxism is, number one, grounded in a kind of communist, a summarial communist kind of dismissal of anything that might be communist and what might be Marxist. That's problematic with our American kind of mythology, right? That we're democratic nations and all communists are therefore bad. And so that usually is how it's usually framed. But if we're being theoretically honest, philosophically honest, Marx does a beautiful job of saying that we imagine in our idealistic Western world that we enter as individuals. And Marx argues that's not true. You entered as a class, that because of the power dynamics and the way in which your society is maintained, you entered as a group. And much of the experiences that you participate in are defined by your group designation. And so in a similar way, critical race theory is making that larger kind of theoretical argument that we don't enter in as individuals. I'm not Vida. I am actually a member of a legally defined group of individuals who were presented certain access to power, privilege, and opportunity, and whose life trajectory is going to be shaped by those or lack of those opportunities. And so in that sense, critical race theory on a larger philosophical sense would align itself with a larger macro analysis. But as my brother beautifully said, it is not Marxism at its base.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
To continue that thread, I think it's important to continue because it is such a word invoked as a scare tactic, and effectively so. But if I can pinpoint anything in the history of critical race theory that might have been, the aha that someone took as a kernel and ran with to prove that CRT folks are Marxists, is Richard Delgado, another foundational critical race theorist. In his telling of the origins, he said in 1989 there was a gathering at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and at that moment, there was a certain identification of some of the scholars as legal Marxists. He does say that at one point, but he's saying it exactly in the way that Dr. Robertson just said. It was more about having that framework of how to look at systemic things, in this particular sense, racism, at the legal aspect. But the critique isn't of systems of class in this case. The critique is of American liberalism in many cases, of looking at what those founding fathers instituted as our liberal agenda, if you will, or our liberal legacy history foundation, and looking back at that and saying, well, do those ideals really hold up in the legal system, in the way that bodies are, policed and incarcerated and all those sorts of things? And so I think that's the major distinction, and it is very much used as a scare tactic for people to veer away from it.
If I could very quickly add to that, I would say that the number of, scholarly products, whether they're books or journal articles or whatever, of folks within the Marxian tradition trying to more or less disprove critical race theory, like there's just tons of that work where, Marxists say, no, they're trying to dismiss all the various tenets of CRT. So there's actually quite a tradition of friction between the two theories.
Interesting. And I am going to ask the next what the tenets of CRT, but I did do a lot of digging into this Marxism claim because I heard it so much. It was like the first thing that rolled off people's tongues when I asked them what CRT was. And I did watch a video, an interview of Kimberly Crenshaw, who's one of the founders of CRT. And she said that she and her colleagues considered themselves critical theorists, which actually draws from some of the European philosophers who were Marxist in origin. But she said that we were influenced by them. So does anybody want to kind of speak to that? Nobody.
This is Vida Robertson again. Yes, that would be very much the case. As my colleagues have beautifully said, the brilliance of CRT is that Dr. Crenshaw and Dr. Bell, Dr. Delgado, Dr. Stefanich, Dr. Masada, that these are individuals coming from Asian American, African American, from male and female perspectives, coming from different spaces in our body politic. And they are asking themselves, how exactly is this notion of race? And then, of course, Dr. Crenshaw is going to ask us in gender and sexuality and disability and religion, how are all of these categories informing the way in which we understand ourselves and that we live in America? And so I celebrate with my students the founding, the work of critical race theory, as my brother beautifully said. It's ongoing, but it's also beautifully eclectic. I mean, there are brothers and sisters doing work on critical whiteness. What does it mean, right? White is a construct. You only got to be white because you made somebody else black, right? These two things came into existence together. They weren't made by God. Nature didn't create those palettes or those people, but they are political designations who emerge in concert with one another, right? And so now all of us are stuck asking ourselves, what does it mean to be Black and to be a woman and to be heterosexual and to be disabled? How exactly are those systems, practices, and institutions of my society informing my reality?
Sure. And that's called intersectionality, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay, so as quickly and as simply as we can we explain what the tenets are of CRT? Because that's another one that seems to get very confused and muddled.
I mean, you're definitely not going to see the tenets represented well on criticalrace.org. So we'll say that much. That's not where it's at. Because some of these critical race theorists aren't even cited in terms of the work that they've done to construct these. But I recently did this for my own book project and was able to come up with, 8 central ones that I think are widely agreed on. And so the first is starting with that notion that race is permanent, racism is central. All right, this is not a fleeting concept. This is not something that is an aberration of some sort. This is a central component to our society. The second is challenging those dominant ideologies like liberalism, like aspects of whiteness or other sorts of things that are overarching patriarchy, those sorts of ideologies. So challenging those. Derek Bell in particular is credited for something called interest convergence. And so what he says is that if people of color get gains, whether it's in policy or other sorts of social ways, it's always with the agreement that the white elites get something out of that too. It's not, without that sort of power and gain as well. Race as social construct is the one about how race is not biological. However, it does have lived reality that society has constructed. And so we have to account for that. We can't ignore that or just colorblind it away. This is something that is a lived reality for people who live in the bodies that we inhabit. Intersectionality, as was mentioned, it was theorized in particular by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, but twin skin to that is anti-essentialism, that just because you are a person of color that doesn't and are lumped into those umbrella categories does not mean that we are all this homogenous same thing. We have variety within that experience. Interdisciplinarity, I think, is really important because that's where you get all of us here today. We're coming from so many different traditions and disciplines and programs of degree, but that is what has informed and keeps going critical race theory, the interdisciplinary energy that's being put into it that helped found things like ethnic studies in the 1960s. So we're coming from that tradition, that activist history. Centrality of experiential knowledge, or the unique voices of color. So centering experiences. So instead of talking about people of color or talking over people of color or doing research about or over them, you talk to them, you get experience from them, you have them relate on their own terms what is happening to them in these situations that are being reported on. And then the last thing that I think is really important is that commitment to social justice, because a lot of those tenets can exist, but without that commitment to social justice, you know, they're not always critical race theory. And so that one is, I think, a pretty important one, almost as important as that centrality or permanence of race and racism.
All right. There are several misconceptions, like we've said many times before, about CRT, and there's a lot of misinformation available. Why and how did it become so confused from the theory that the creators developed?
Well, that's a recent, this is Jean Baptiste. That's a recent phenomenon that, you know, is a reactionary movement that's gone on since George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and the third reckoning of race in this country, grabbing at straws and grabbing at concepts that can be misinterpreted, maligned, and used as a weapon to whitewash race and racism in this country. To get to that myth, I love what John Amici, the British leadership expert, talks about the myth of innocence and fairness. And so it's this combination of white fragility and white supremacy that are grabbing at anything, any concept that's out there that has legitimacy and weaponizing it and turning it political. And that's how critical race theory, anti-racism, cultural competency, all these things that have, you know, deep, important roots in K-12 education have been used and misused by parents, by trustees, by schools, and by politicians at the local, state, and national level.
And I mean, there's Christopher Rufo. Have we all heard of him? Because he's been pretty vocal, pretty transparent about his strategy. He says he's a self-proclaimed journalist and brawler. He calls himself, he's been interviewed happily by many different, you know, very reputable outlets. And there are tweets, he has made clear his plan. The quoted tweet I have here in front of me from March 15th of this year is he said, "We have successfully frozen their brand, critical race theory, into the public conversation and are steadily driving up negative perceptions. We will eventually turn it toxic as we put all of the various cultural insanities under that brand category." There it is. I mean, he's telling us what he's doing. And so any wondering how this is happening, we have a legal strategist who is actively doing this, campaigning, if you will. What his agenda is, I don't want to guess at, but you know, it's there. It's being laid bare for any of us who are paying attention to that guy in particular.
We have a couple of questions coming in from Facebook. First question is, what is the best way to explain this to somebody who's completely opposed to it? What are they afraid of? And then her follow-up question is, why is everyone up in arms? Because they will now be taught that this will now be taught in schools. What exactly does this mean? There's a lot of questions I'm throwing at you. Shouldn't these concepts already be covered in school? So the first question is, how do you talk to somebody who's completely opposed to this?
This is Vida Robertson again. The best approach for inviting a cordial conversation about critical race theory would be to encourage the other interlocutor to engage in a recognition that our American ideals, right? There was a moment when our founding fathers, as Dr. Martinez pointed out, our founding fathers were crafting this particular document. And in that document, they made clear certain philosophical ideas that were unprecedented in the world, that all of us, they said men, and they actually meant that, but that's another conversation, that all men were created equal, and they were endowed by that creator with certain things that were unseparatable from them, right? That was life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That original congregation of men, now that we recognize it, our sisters would not be invited into this experiment until the 1920s. So that men literally only meant men. So also there were people outside building the nation's roads, constructing the nation's economy. Those people were clearly not men. There were people whose lands that we were presiding on in order to hold this Continental Congress. They clearly were not men. There were peoples who guided us in our Western expansion who were already speaking Spanish in all of the corners of our nation. Those people equally were not men. So now we're stuck with the realization that our nation, contrary to our mythology, was not created for all men. And the nation that was created from that document was not for the purpose of promoting the life, liberty, and happiness of all of those women who were left out, all of those natives whose land was taken, all of those Africans who were already a part of the population, all of those Latinos who informed our reality. Those peoples were not incorporated in the men. So now it is our job, now that we're much smarter, much more sophisticated nation, our job is to figure out how do we get our nation to live up to that ideal. We cannot fix that which we cannot see. And therefore, critical race theory is a beautiful lens, right? A nuanced lens that allows us to see things that were present before invisible to us so that we can be things that we have never been.
As a higher critical analysis in higher education, not for K-12 education. So there are elements of understanding race, understanding, did we lose everybody?
I think
looks that way.
We're all still here. I think it's actually Noggin that left. Uh-oh.
And it looks like it's live on Facebook. I wonder if something got sabotaged.
Well, we've still got our discussion questions.
Yes,
we're
maybe
still
you should
streaming.
continue our, yes.
Well,
maybe we can keep rolling.
I'll just continue. Maybe should I continue the thought?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think so.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So again, I've been in education for 40 years this year, and okay. And now you're on mute.
We got kicked out. Were y'all just having a great conversation without us?
Well, we were just trying to figure out what happened.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I cannot even tell you, but Dr. Robertson, you were waxing eloquent. Please continue. You're on mute though.
I had finished my thought. I believe my brother was continuing.
Oh, okay.
Supplemental comment.
Well, we'll have to watch it back and find out what you were so eloquent about.
Yeah, it looked really deep.
I did.
You hands were going and breaking into it. So,
wait, I think Dr. Baptiste was talking.
Well, I was just going to bring all this into K-12 education, and I was just mentioning that I've been involved in education for 40 years. And although I want to say I started when I was 4, I didn't. But whether it's the 9 years I spent in public school, or the years, 31 years that I've spent in independent schools at the regional, state, and national level, critical race theory has not been taught. We have taught and had experiences around social justice and around race and around sexism and xenophobia and anti-Semitism. And how those have impacted the American experience. And we also talk about belonging, and we also talk about cultural competence, and we talk about social emotional learning, which gets at all of these things that have roots in understanding identity. And that's the bottom line to this whole argument is, how is identity factored into the K-12 educational experience? And it permeates all the way through, I would say through pre-K through 12. And so that's what the focus should be on, and how we deal with our current reality, not the mythology of white supremacy or white fragility that's now being masked by attacking critical race theory, which frankly is not a thrust of K-12 education.
Well, let's talk about that too, because Dr. Batiste, you work in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and a lot of people think that's code term for critical race theory. And so, can you tell us what the difference between DEIB, SEL, which is social emotional learning, and CRT is? Or just tell us what those two things are.
So the paradigm I like to share about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, I like to use the pyramid. Architects will tell you that the pyramid is one of the strongest structures known to humankind because of the very strong base. So I put diversity at the foundational level of my pyramid. It is about the numbers. It is quantifiable. It is counting up both visible and invisible forms of difference that you have within an organization or in a community. In the middle level is either it's inclusion and belonging. How do you in fact build a sense of community around the 5 Ps of this work? People, programs, policies, practices, and power. And then the higher level of that pyramid is equity and justice. And that's when you deal with systemic issues of difference and systemic issues in which people are advantaged and disadvantaged. Social emotional learning, coming from that whole Howard Gardner multiple intelligence thing, and how we can build a sense of moral intelligence and ethical intelligence and empathy is all part of what we call social emotional learning. None of that is part of this higher level, critical, graduate level, legal understanding of critical race theory. It's apples and oranges.
Well, I mean, I was joking with David and then said, okay, I literally have been studying this for about a month. I'm 47 and educated. I'm just now feeling like, I think I understand what CRT is.
Babe, you're
What?
45, sweetheart.
What did I say? I was 47?
Hey, that means,
I have no idea why I said that. But my point is that this is not something that you can teach to little Timmy who's, 12. He would never understand it. We barely do as adults.
And I was going to just piggyback. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was just about to bring you in. I think it's a great time, Dr. Jordan, for you to come in. You've been listening, but wanted to hear your insights on the educational school level, being over all the curriculum and instruction for a pretty major district here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, major sized district. What are your insights on everything that's been shared and how it's being worked out in your position and with students?
Well, I appreciate everything that everyone said earlier, and I'm going to just kind of piggyback from Dr. Batiste. Our job in the K through 12 realm is to lay the foundation, build the capacity so that when our students grow up, they can contribute to society and they are aware and they have all the tools that they need to feel accepted, to feel like they belong. So in the K through 12 realm, we focus a lot on diversity, equity, inclusion, acceptance, and then SEL. So we want our kids to know we see you, right? However you are, however you come to us, we see you, we value you, and we will get you whatever you need to elevate up to the next level. That's what's important to us in that K through 12 level. And so preparing our kids to be able to think and do the research that we're all having to do when they get to that age. But it's also giving them the tools they need and developing curriculum for them to be great decision makers, right? There's a lot of information out there. I mean, I think, Danita, you said it earlier, you Google critical race theory and so much comes up. And our kids are a social media world, right? Everything that my own personal children know is from TikTok, Snapchat, or some type of social media, right? And so it's important for us to be able to embed skills with our students to be able to decipher what may be truth and what may not be truth, right? What will allow them to be accepted and for them not to be accepted. So from the curriculum and instruction lens, it is so important for every student to have someone that looks like him or her, right? In the classrooms and in the building. That is a priority. I think about growing up. I don't know where I would be if I didn't have Mrs. Nelson in my 6th grade classroom to tell me that I could be anything and everything I wanted to be. And there was only one Mrs. Nelson that I ever saw, but that's all I needed. And so making sure that our students have people that look like them is important. And also having curriculum that speaks to their culture, that accepts them, that provides them knowledge where they are. So it's not excluding them. I love to read about Hispanic heritage. I'm not Hispanic, but that love can be cultivated through the literature, through our lessons, through our activities. And so looking at our curriculum and instruction, it is important that we are inclusive and we make sure that we embrace our students where they are.
So there are, I think what you really just described was the purpose of those positions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's a lot of districts, because of all that's been going on in our country lately, have been hiring diversity and inclusion experts. And so a lot of what you just said is kind of their job, to make sure that there's diversity of staff, make sure that there is diversity of curriculum and things like that.
Exactly, for sure. And it's one of those things, if I can say, it's a buzzword, it's a buzz phrase for some districts as they're adding those positions, right? And for other districts, they're saying, yes, our students need this. And so we're unable to fulfill this need. And so we need to bring someone in. I'm blessed to serve in a district where we don't necessarily have a diversity, equity, and inclusion department, because we all share the same philosophy and tenets. And so we're not developing silos, whereas the curriculum department, it's my job to develop curriculum that's inclusive. No, it's our job, because they're our kids. And so we haven't really had, as a community, the questioning of, well, why are we adding this new position? And what is their purpose? And now are you excluding other kids? Because every single person in the district in which I serve is responsible for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and whatever job capacity that we offer.
So add to Dr. Jordan's piece real quick, that independent schools also do have diversity practitioners, and they go by different titles: Chief Diversity Officer, Director of Diversity and Inclusion. In higher ed, it's the same. Corporations have CDOs as well. So I also want to make sure that another buzzword that's being maligned and misused against our work is indoctrination. And what Dr. Jordan has just described, I'm not going to be political, sorry, I didn't mean to say by the right, but by those that want to attack our work, they'll say we're trying to indoctrinate students, right? We are educating, and it's the education that has been part of public and private and for-profit education for a long period of time now. So I think we need to be careful about how that word indoctrination is being misused.
So within instruction in public schools, I'm not as sure in the private school realm and the independent school realm, but each state has what they call their standards, right? So there are core standards that are to be taught in the classroom around different topics. I have them in mathematics, and the expectation is that throughout the course of the year that we've covered all these different topics. So by the end of the year that they are ready for different exams. I know, within, the humanities area, there's standards as well. Different states have different standards based upon what's being taught, of course. So what I want to know is, so if there's already prescribed standards that have been in place for years, how did this discussion of CRT come into the conversation of instruction when
there's already standards?
There's already standards, and teachers, we're upheld to go for those are our marching orders. Now, how we get there may be different, but as far as critical race theory as a curriculum, I'm trying to understand, just me, and for me, just as an educator, how did that come to be?
The historic tie-in that I see just from being someone who comes from Arizona is the ban on ethnic studies that happened in 2010. That was, state-sponsored legislation that legally banned the teaching of Mexican American history and literatures and was in effect until 2017. And what I learned from that and from tying that into the history, especially that interdisciplinary tenet of critical race theory, is that ethnic studies threat is part of what I think is the fear tactic to use within curriculum settings of, well, okay, if we're going to teach westward expansion, let's say, right, what is the story? Because it all boils down, for me at least, back to narrative. What is the story that is being promoted in that particular piece of curriculum? And what I myself learned, and what Danita, I spoke with you about earlier, what brought me into critical race theory in particular, is knowing that what I learned in those curriculum settings as a young person left out parts of the story that I knew from my own family's oral histories of what our part was as Mexican Americans working alongside Chinese migrant workers who were building the railroad, right? Where were those stories? I knew them. My grandfather told me, but they weren't in our books. They weren't being taught by the teachers. And so there was a real demand, at least in Tucson, Arizona, where I grew up in the early 2000s, from teachers and students to incorporate those types of stories into the curriculum. And it was fascinating, the effectiveness of it, because students are becoming invested in their educations in different ways. They were doing well on other sorts of state standards that had nothing to do with literature and social studies. And then the state legislature banned it because they deemed it anti-American and a threat to the American government and Homeland Security and all these crazy things that they dragged out as part of what that meant in the curriculum. And so I guess going back to what Dr. Robertson was saying, we have these stories about how our country was founded, what our country's state of being is now. And it's a matter of whether or not we want those other stories to be added to the curriculum. This is not a request to detract from, replace, supplant anything that's already existing. It's only additive in the sense of broadening the narrative, making it richer, and doing, again, what one of the CRT tenets calls for, also centralizing those experiences of people of color who know their stories and can contribute them in those ways.
So let me ask, since we're talking about curriculum, there has been a lot of legislation recently passed regarding how social studies curriculum will be taught in the fall. Here in Texas, HB 3979 was passed. So what I'd like to know is how that's going to impact social studies curriculum in the fall. And yeah, I'll start there.
So for us, I think David said this well, we have our standards, we have our TEKS that we are expected to teach, right? That is our first and number one obligation to our students. Next, we are to teach them and celebrate diversity, right? That is also important. Dr. Martinez, you said this. I was blessed to grow up with my great grandmother and my grandmother and my mother telling me about all the different things that occurred. But our kids now may not have that generation to educate them. So who fills in that gap? We started with, it takes a village for sure. And so, yes, we will follow our TEKS and we will follow our standards, but it's also in the K through 12 realm, our responsibility to celebrate diversity, but also expose and provide awareness and acceptance throughout that. And so it's a twofold curriculum for us. We will teach our TEKS, we will teach our standards, but we will also teach diversity and acceptance, and that will be built into our curriculum.
So I think what's happening now is that we're at a crossroads. We're at a crossroads of how the narrative of our history is being communicated to students, locally, statewide, and nationally. How do we balance the great history? This is a great country to live in, and I'm blessed to be here. And I tell my students all the time, is you have every opportunity in the world to do whatever you want to do, and do great things. At the same time, as we learn about our history, that some aspects of history are not being shared. And so how do we balance sharing the truth? Because we don't want to not share the truth, because I was just telling with my students this morning in my summer institute that I'm teaching, that the truth of history is not always pretty. It's not all unicorns and ice cream and cake. That would be nice to say. And that would be a narrow framework in which to look at the scope of history. How do we balance sharing about some of the atrocities that have happened, and they're real, they're not made up and not conjured, without causing divisiveness within the classrooms, but also bringing a balanced approach so that people know, wow, I didn't know about that. Ooh, that wasn't good. Without students and people feeling isolated or feel like there's now a division, but objectively sharing the truth of what's happened in our history.
Sure, because Dr. Dr. Robertson mentioned some of the founding documents of our nation, and something that is not that many people don't realize is that there are some clauses in the Constitution that actually caused or stated that the slave trade was going to continue for another 20 years. And then there was a fugitive slave clause, because right now a lot of people are like, no, the Constitution, the founding documents. They're trying to make sure that their children are not indoctrinated against America. But to your point, there's a lot of history that has to be reckoned with.
Yeah, I think the question of how to have these conversations and be real about our history and be real about our present in the classroom, that's really difficult. So as a faculty member who's charged with the responsibility of preparing the next generation of school leaders, we take very seriously the need to give folks the tools that are required to have those conversations. And not every teacher, not every principal preparation program does that. And it's not just the onus isn't completely on preparation programs. Districts have roles as well with their professional development of their faculty and staff, because whether the approach is, hey, we're going to collectively in this classroom, we're going to enter into this particular set of agreements before we embark on this discussion. If a simple tool like that or something more complex, folks need to be equipped to do that, because it is difficult. And I have concerns about how House Bill 3979 impacts that. And there's a subsection, and I'm just reading straight from the bill. It says a teacher may not be compelled to discuss a particular current event or widely debated and currently controversial issue of public policy or social affairs. And what's tied onto that says a teacher who does choose to just engage in these topics, they need to strive to explore the topic from diverse and contending perspectives without giving deference to any one perspective. So it raises a couple of questions. Can I elect not to engage in discussions that are it's patently obvious that we have to, like the wake of George Floyd's killing? How can we not talk about that in the classroom? And then when it comes to giving deference to different perspectives, what if some perspectives on their face are, interlaced with absurdity, and it's just not room for taking those opinions seriously? And then who is the arbiter of whether or not we're being equal with these things? So I understand some of the underlying spirit here, but I certainly have some concerns. But my short answer to your very important question is how do we do this? It's messy and it's difficult work, and I think it's something we'll always be grappling with in trying to improve upon.
Sure.
Well, in particular, in public schools, how do you do this while at the same time you have stringent accountability measures in place that you have to fulfill? It just seems like it's going to be a near impossible task to do that and the accountability you have in place.
I would like to know, and many other parents would like to know, are we going to be missing important parts of our history because of this bill? I know that here in Texas, Senate Bill 3 has come to kind of give more explanation as to what we need to do with House Bill 3979. And It looks on the surface, at least from what I read, that some things like the Chicano movement, women's suffrage, the Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech are going to be eliminated. So, and several people have posted about that, and they're up in arms. So, I just want to see: are we going to be missing some of those important things by some of this new legislation? You're on mute, Dr. Batiste.
I'm just looking at the other people that are zooming in. Everyone's nodding yes.
Oh,
So
okay.
I'm just voicing what we're all saying.
Okay. So yes, they are going to be removing some of these very important things.
That's the intent. Yeah. And it's by design, so and that's the risk, right? That is the risk and the consequence within support for this or lack of resistance against these sorts of initiatives. This is
It's the whitewashing.
Absolutely.
Whitewashing of our history. Yeah. That begs the question, and we're out of time. I wanted to get into some other things, like I won't even say what I wanted to get into, but we'll leave those for maybe another time. But this begs the question: what do we as parents do about proposed legislation? I feel like this CRT legislation came as a surprise. We didn't even know what it was. What are the best ways to stay informed about potential and proposed legislation and how can we best make our voices heard?
Speak up, vote, pay attention to what the legislators are proposing and how they're voting. And, for those that are in independent schools or private schools, you have, direct access to the board and to the head of school to voice your concerns about these stringent ways in which critical race theory, which is not happening in K-12 education, but how other things that are happening are being maligned. And, whether you're public or private school, use your right to vote and pay attention to what these legislators are proposing and vote them out of office next time they're up for election or re-election.
I would equally support my brother's claim. It is really important that we are well informed as a citizenry. This entire experiment of self-governance, not simply in our educational system, but on our national political level, infers that we are well informed. And so I would encourage parents to be well informed. Recognize, number one, as Dr. Baptiste wonderfully said, critical race theory is not being taught anywhere in your elementary, middle, or high schools. It is not happening. That is a mischaracterization. I'll be a little more direct. They are lying. You are being lied to. That's just a fact. It's not even debatable. It's a simple fact. And then number two, of course, the question becomes, why are we being lied to, right? That's the question. We have better things to do with our lives. So what is the goal of this mischaracterization? What is the aim of removing these pieces of our curricula? Where exactly is it moving us? Again, as a critical race theorist, as a critically minded parent, you always embrace the idea that, as Aristotle would argue, everything we do is teleological. It is moving toward its completion. It is moving toward its end. And education is one of those mechanisms. So what is our education, the education of our children, moving us toward? Dr. Kendi would say, is it making us more racist or non-racist, or are we becoming anti-racist? Are we moving toward the very American ideals that we laid out in our founding documents, living up to our greatest aspirations?
For everyone.
For all of us. Yes, ma'am.
I love that, Dr. Robertson. I would also say, for me, it's a 3 I's, right? So be informed. Dr. Batiste said that. Be inquisitive. Ask questions. When you don't know, don't assume, ask, right? And then be involved. There's no way as a parent, better way than seeing it in the schools and being active and involved with your children's campuses. So I would just say, be informed, be inquisitive, be involved.
And I'm going to kind of put y'all's feet to the fire here again, because you guys are all in this. You're going to know about legislation and things that are popping up. But I'm regular Joe Blow mom, or Jane Blow mom, and I am finding out about stuff from articles that say you can't teach racism in school. And by then, so much has happened that I can't. I don't have a voice at that point. It's everything has already happened. So again, how do I find out when earlier on in the process when things are being proposed, or how do you guys get your information?
I think for me, I've looked at people like this, Christopher Rufo, and who are his associations? Where does he have influence in different states? And what are those constituents she's linked to in terms of different sorts of politicians who are here that are going to do copycat legislation from one state to the other to be in line with whatever the political ideologies are that they're trying to represent. And so it's trendiness, really, if you would, right? And so you just watch the trends. If you start hearing or sniffing this out in other states that tend to trend with your state, so I'd say in this case Florida, Arizona, those type of states, then you can guess that there's something that's going to be coming down the line with our legislators pretty soon, because they try to stay in step and in line with each other. And so those are kind of the trends that I've been following, in the sense of, oh, okay, if it happened in that state, it's probably going to happen here, or it happened in that city that's within Texas, right? It's probably going to come here pretty soon. So that's mostly how I've been, paying attention.
For parents in particular, you must be careful of some of these organizations that purport to be about fairness, but they are about the misinformation and the malignment and malignment of our work. One is called FAIR. The other is called Parents Defending Education. And so I think informed parents need to be very careful of these foundations and these spring up organizations that are actually being astroturfed, a term that I learned recently. They're supposedly grassroots organizations that are against critical race theory or anti-racism, but they're actually very deeply funded by well-heeled individuals and organizations to promote this malignment and this campaign to whitewash our history. So, as parents are becoming much more informed, be careful of where you're getting your information, and be careful who you're relying on, but particularly with these spring up parent groups that are helping with this mythology that's out there.
Sure. And I'll also just say that wherever you are, whatever state you're in, you can go to your capital's website. For us in Texas, it's capital.texas.gov. And what you can do is you can follow a bill. So you can put the information in, that I'm following, House bill or Senate bill, blah, blah, and then it will email you whenever there's news about this. So as it moves through the process of becoming a law, then it will show you exactly what committee it's in, what's happening, are they voting, and all of those things.
I would add one more recommendation to all the wonderful ones that have come out. Especially parents, bandwidth to engage in politics and the media is very limited. There's only so many hours in the day. But I would say there are reliable sources of media that, when it comes to education, policy and education news, are largely facts-based reporters. And some of the biggest examples are local newspapers: Houston Chronicle, Star Telegram, Dallas Morning News. Even though these are under-resourced newsrooms in comparison to the past, they have really wonderful education reporters that really have their finger on the pulse of what's going on in our legislatures. The Texas Tribune, there's plenty of sources out there that are very light on opinion and analysis and very heavy on fact-based reporting. And I think that's exactly what parents, to the extent they're able to, should be engaging with.
All right. Well, I want to end with this last comment thought. Just kind of thinking through everything we've been talking about today. And, as many of you know, that Danita and I are people of faith, that we are Christian. And so, as Christians, we look, through our faith through the lens of the Bible, which is a historical book. Okay. What I love about the Bible is that it's kind of rated R. It's ugly. It talks about the great things that have happened. It talks about the highs and the lows, the victories, the struggles. It calls out things that are not correct. It shows people standing up to rules and laws and policies of the time that were unjust to some people. Sometimes things were not addressed, but the beauty of it is that the whole story was told. It wasn't just told as a glossed over aspect of humanity. And we see that even in humanity, that we have our own flaws and we have we make mistakes, and that it's okay to discuss them so that we can learn from them, so that we can become better as a society, so we can truly see each other as equals, and that no one is better than anybody else. No race, no gender is better or worse than, but that we are all human beings. And because of that, we all are ascribed to have dignity, value, and worth. And if we can look through the lens of society, even when it may not look pretty, that how can we redeem the times by looking at where we are through a correctional lens? Because what I've said, and I'm gonna wrap this up here, but I've said to my kids, even today, I said, just because a law is a law doesn't mean that it's just. So we have to reconcile. How do we reconcile what's just with what is legal? And then how do we make our voices heard? And so we want all parents and families to know and to understand. And again, this episode is not exhausting. This is not an exhaustive episode, but to do your research and do your homework, and even look at the other side, look at a different point of view that may not be what you may already have, because we all have biases and presuppositions about this topic to some extent. But how do we, our goal with this show and every topic that we do is to get to the truth. Okay. We're not, we don't have all the answers, but we want to help to put some stuff out there for you to chew about. And some may reject it and some may not, but at least there's, we've had some experts on today to share their insights. And we encourage you to not end the conversation here, but to continue to do your research and even look on the other side. From where you're coming from, no matter what it is, so that you can be well informed and not just bent by a particular narrative.
That's why I married you. That was very good.
Thank you, sweetheart. I try. Sometimes I say something. I guess sometimes.
That's right.
Yeah, at home, it's usually not though.
Well.
Yeah. Love you though.
Awkward ending. All right.
That's just marriage. That's marriage.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. Guys, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for giving us so much to think about and to look further into.
Thank you. It's really been a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. So Noggin Educational Foundation is the premier sponsor of school days. So we always want to let you guys know what's happening with Noggin. We're currently taking applications for 2 of our programs. Noggin offers 12 hours of free private tutoring to students through our educational coaching program, and through our ARD advocacy program. Parents receive support in securing services and accommodations their kids need at school for learning disabilities or special needs. With the closure of schools and distance learning in 2020, the education gap for low-income students has widened, and the one-on-one intervention we provide is vital. So see our website, nogginfoundation.org, Noggin, or email me at Doneda, Doneda, at nogginfoundation.org for more information. Also, each summer, Noggin offers a summer math and reading program called SPARK, which stands for Summers Producing Academically Ready Kids. And we serve at-risk students in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. We collect brand new backpacks for our students and for students at local Title I schools in the DFW area through our social media challenge, the hashtag Bought a Backpack Challenge. So join us in taking that challenge through August 12th. Details are on our website at nogginfoundation.org / bought a backpack. We'll also put that in on our website. And if you're not in Dallas, you can check out our Amazon wish list and make it real easy for you to send that to us. Also, we are working on some great shows for the summer as we are concluding our summertime. Make sure that you subscribe to School Dazed, Help for Moms and Dads of School-Aged Kids on any podcast platform so you don't miss any of our new episodes. And also head to our website, schooldazedshow.com, for more information about all that we're doing and the resources mentioned here on School Dazed. And remember, you don't ever have to miss a show. Find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pandora, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Audible, and pretty much anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Noggin Foundation. That's Noggin. And last but not least, we always want to end the show by saying that David and I are parenting by grace. We depend on God to give us the wisdom and strength we need to raise our kids into flourishing adults. And if you would like to know more about that, feel free to email us at info@schooldazedshow.com. Have a great week and stay safe. Okay, hold on. We do all the things.
She has to do all
So
the
many
things.
buttons to press. Okay, everybody can come back off mute. Right. My sentiment exactly. There was a lot of there were a lot of comments online. Not a ton of questions, just kind of comments that, you know, just you can go back and read those, but you know, nothing crazy. But thank you guys. We actually got that in much faster than I thought we were going to, although I wanted to talk about the 1619 project, but that would have opened up a whole rabbit hole. Yeah, I know. It's like, we don't have time.
Just FYI, the Zoom still says it's live on Facebook. I don't know if that matters.